Story 1. They change their opinion when they learn new information that is more accurate than what they already know. Story 2. Depends on how you define smart. Responses such as tend to be quiet and listens and reads the room relate more to emotional intelligence rather than the traditional definition of intelligence, which focuses on pattern recognition. Many very smart people, such as actuaries whom I work with frequently, tend to be poor at reading the room and will often correct others they perceive as wrong. In my limited experience, academics exhibit similar behavior. People who have won the Fields Medal or made major scientific breakthroughs generally, with some exceptions, do not play well with others. Emotional intelligence differs significantly and, in my limited experience, is a much better predictor of financial success and meaningful application of intelligence. To combine both aspects, I believe what characterizes truly smart people is the ability to maximize their own strengths and surround themselves with people who complement their weaknesses. Story 3. Someone who is quietly intelligent tends to listen closely during conversations. Rather than correcting others outright when they are wrong, they ask thoughtful questions to understand their perspective and gently guide them toward a more accurate understanding. Story 4. They process and learn information quickly and have strong reading comprehension and perceptual reasoning abilities. At the same time, they also know that no universal definition of intelligence exists. There is the dilemma: how do you measure something you cannot define? Story 5. The desire to learn and engage academically is important. Many people equate introversion with intelligence, but when I think of the most intelligent person I have ever met, I do not think of a man who quietly observes everything around him. I think of a man in his mid-50s at the pinnacle of his career, a critical care pharmacist and head of the department, who still gets excited when given the opportunity to educate someone else or learn something new. His knowledge was vast and seemingly endless, yet nothing quenched his insatiable thirst for knowledge and his desire to share it with others. That, in my opinion, is the most profound sign of intelligence, not just the knowledge itself, but the yearning for it. Story 6. In a small group, they can make a short comment that is at the same time a legitimate question to one person, an inside joke to another, and seemingly meaningless to a third person. Story 7. They ask great questions out of genuine curiosity. They explain complex things in a simple, clear way. They notice patterns or connections others miss. They have a dry or subtle sense of humor that sneaks up on you. They make the people around them feel smarter, not dumber. Story 8. The delivery of their message is simple, but the message content is unique and profound, causing a mental double take. I am not sure if this makes sense. Story 9. They pay less attention to labels, appearances, and pedigrees and more attention to substance and intrinsic value. Story 10. One of the clearest signs someone is truly intelligent but does not try to show it is in how they ask questions. They do not dominate conversations or display their knowledge. Instead, they ask thoughtful, open-ended questions that advance the discussion or encourage deeper thinking. They are curious, not performative, and are comfortable admitting when they do not know something. You will also notice they are great at explaining things without making anyone feel unintelligent, and they usually listen more than they speak. When they do speak, it is meaningful and well-timed. It is not about proving their intelligence. It is simply evident. Story 11. They do not correct people just to prove a point. They share information when it adds value, but they are not obsessed with being right. Intelligent individuals usually care more about understanding than winning arguments. Story 12. Doesn't try to show it or tries not to show it. Based on what I have read in the comments, there seems to be a conflation between intelligence and quietness that I do not agree with. I grew up in a high-success, high-standards environment where I encountered a wide variety of smart people, and they can be just as talkative, insecure, or neurotic as anyone else. The way they interact with others and display their intelligence speaks more to their social skills and upbringing. What really sets them apart is the way they ask questions and draw conclusions. If you are teaching someone a board game that you have been playing for a couple of years, they may ask a question that, for you, took actually playing the game and experiencing that situation to ask. They may draw conclusions about strategy that took you a month of playing or watching videos to understand. You can tell that the only reason you can beat them at the game right now is because you had a head start. In the classroom, they are often the ones who will ask the teacher a question, and the teacher will say, "We will get there in a second." They have already grasped the concept you are learning to the extent that they can replicate the process, and the only thing holding them back from the next step is the information explicitly being withheld from them. In my observation, intelligent people receive implicit feedback that they should be quieter, listen more than they speak, or enact other behaviors that mask their intelligence when the environment around them cannot keep up and treats them with resentment, insecurity, or even confusion. That is what makes some intelligent people so good at breaking complex topics down into simple ideas. They have been doing it their whole life. Likewise, some intelligent people do not understand the pace of the average person and end up being poor teachers. Intelligence is not singularly measurable. Story 13. Not afraid to admit when they do not know something or are wrong. It is not that hard. That is how you learn. Story 14. They accept that they do not know it and are open to learning. Another thing I would say is that they do not have a rigid belief system. Story 15. Pretty anecdotal, but many of my genuinely smart friends are oddly extroverted, hyperactive, act silly, and call their friends nerds, including me, without fear in public. One friend in particular was a complete class clown but knew history inside and out and used markers to represent major strategic battles. Generally, introverts think before they speak, but my friends who were like that were chronic overthinkers who rarely discussed academic concepts. Story 16. They know this topic is always asked in this subreddit. Do not ask the same question again just to read comments that make you feel smart. Story 17. When someone explains something very complex that goes right over your head, while assuming you understand it as easily as they do. The Dunning-Kruger effect in reverse. Story 18. My husband presents as an average person but almost always wins any game that involves logic or strategy. I did not realize how truly smart he was until we played cards. Story 19. They are naturally quiet. When they do get to speak, they ramble and rant as ideas come rushing out. So they keep their mouths shut to prevent this. At least, most of my smart friends are very quiet on issues and impress everyone when allowed to voice their opinions. Story 20. Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. Often attributed to Abraham Lincoln or Mark Twain. Story 21. Listening, asking questions, and then making useful comments and contributions are important. The first two allow you to appear knowledgeable, while the last part demonstrates true intelligence. Story 22. Smart people do not need to see degrees or credentials to determine intelligence. They can see it in a homeless alcoholic and also see through someone who is less intelligent with a doctorate. Degrees exist for the benefit of the average person. Story 23. They listen more than they talk, stay curious, and are not afraid to admit when they do not know something. Story 24. People who are smart tend to brag about their accomplishments but dislike when you ask how they did it. However, people who are truly intelligent never brag and prefer to help others learn rather than talk about themselves. If you can teach and help others, you are much smarter than most people in the same field. Story 25. I feel like it is when they ask questions while also having the ability to share their thoughts on the matter. Story 26. They listen intently, ask a few insightful questions, and effortlessly synthesize complex ideas for others. Story 27. When talking to them feels easy, not because you are smart, but because they are making an effort to meet you where you are. Story 28. An intelligent person does not try to shine, they just shine. Not with words, but with the way they think, listen, and act. Their strength lies in modesty, clarity, and depth. Story 29. I have met some really intelligent people, to the point that when you find out just how intelligent they are, it surprises you. The biggest indication is that they know when to be quiet. They are usually the last ones to speak, and when they do, it normally stops the conversation because they elegantly provide the solution to whatever problem is happening. Story 30. How do you spot an idiot? Look for the person who is cruel. The kindest person in the room is often the smartest. Governor J.B. Pritzker. Story 31. When you tell someone they are intelligent, they may respond by saying, "No, I am not," and then list all the reasons they believe they are not intelligent. Story 32. I remember when I was working in a Fortune 500 company, I had to pretend to be unintelligent and impressed with ideas from colleagues in my team, knowing their ideas would not work. By acting unintelligent, I was able to be lazy and work slower, allowing me to relax and take many breaks. A few years later, they figured it out. I remember I finished a PowerPoint presentation for my boss in 20 minutes, then waited 2 weeks before showing it to him. He was very impressed with the amount of effort and work I had done in 2 weeks. It literally took me 20 minutes, but by waiting 2 weeks, I knew he would appreciate it more. Story 33. I feel like they are the last people to go around telling someone how much they know or how qualified they are in a place. Story 34. I'm sorry. I'm not very smart. Explain it to me like I am 5. I knew a very smart person who said this when he heard nonsense. Very smart. It was beautiful to watch, especially as the person spreading nonsense imploded. Story 35. You can carry on a conversation with them about anything. They will say they do not know much about rare subjects. They can figure things out. Story 36. When a person has the skill to meet you where you are, rather than where they want you to be, and you cannot tell that it is happening. Story 37. Someone truly intelligent does not need approval from others. They prefer to study those around them and learn as much as possible. They know when to say, I do not know or I was wrong, rather than persist in error. They work for the betterment of the wider community, not just for personal gain. They avoid drawing attention and work quietly in the background, where they can be more productive without distraction. Story 38. Just read the book The Innovators by Walter Isaacson, which included Alan Turing, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Paul Allen, and Steve Ballmer. It is a brilliant take on geniuses and very smart people. While being eccentric and sometimes belligerent, all were engaged, active listeners hoping to glean others' ideas and learn anything new, no matter how trivial. Great read. Story 39. They do not talk at all because most intelligent people are depressed and resigned to being in their heads forever. Story 40. There are many types of intelligence, such as emotional intelligence and cognitive intelligence. All I know is that habits reveal a person's character, as explained in the book Atomic Habits. It is a positive sign when someone chooses to improve themselves internally and does not let hardships hinder their progress. Story 41. People who remain silent when discussing a transmission they do not understand and are willing to learn. Story 42. The people who silently listen to the entire conversation, genuinely listen, and then share their thoughts and solutions after hearing more information. Story 43. They always have a sense of where they are, even in unfamiliar places. They can drive or walk without the need for a map and remember where they are and how to get back to where they came from. Story 44. Someone who does not engage in pointless arguments or conversations. They think before speaking and choose to walk away. Story 45. They read a lot, remember critical details, and make connections. They can also recall relevant information at the right time. Story 46. A big sign is they ask really good questions and actually listen to the answers. They make complicated things seem simple and never make others feel unintelligent. Usually, they are more curious than showy, quietly connecting the dots and helping out when needed without making a big deal about it. Story 47. Calmness in disputes. True intelligence is shown through calmness when others are hot-tempered. A person does not try to prove their case at any cost but instead argues calmly or avoids pointless arguments altogether. Story 48. Learns new things faster than everyone else. Asks questions that do not attack but challenge. Can explain complicated things simply. Can make you doubtful or insecure by making you question what you believe to be true, and has a curious mind. Story 49. Avoiding public recognition. She does not seek public approval or applause. She does not need to prove that she is smart. She simply is. Often, her real achievements go unnoticed by the general public. Story 50. You can speak to them about any topic, and they not only understand you but can actually articulate a thought longer than right. Story 51. Honestly, it is what they say. No matter how they say it, it will sound well thought out and from a certain perspective where you will be like, ooh, it does not have to be a groundbreaking answer. Story 52. They don't lie or flip-flop. You can trust what they say, even if sometimes they are saying something you may not agree with. It is a trust thing for me and how I would define my dad. Story 53. He has something to show for but never brags about it. Intelligence to me is measured by the end product, which highlights a brain that makes well-balanced decisions and solves problems. Story 54. Their brains sparkle. They are very quick. They pick up new ideas and philosophies and suggest conclusions that were written thousands of years before, which took hundreds of years to reach. Their memory is often shockingly good, and they might have synesthesia. Eye contact is often optional. Being brilliant does not mean you are curious, motivated, or moral. I have met them all. A genius who is a postman, a crooked banker, or a genius coder who knows no history. Story 55. How people treat others and how long it takes for them to speak when in a room with others varies. Generally, the smartest person tends to wait until everyone else has given their input first. These are general rules regarding the majority of people. Outliers are the exception, but most people know who the smartest person in the room is, and they do not have to make themselves known. Story 56. People who are quiet never make a wrong step socially, and you have no idea what their beliefs really are. Story 57. When they do not post these questions on AskReddit and look through the answers hoping they apply to them. Story 58. Reading your answers gave me more understanding. Thank you to everyone who answered and also thank you to those still typing. Story 59. Smart people eventually are called to share their knowledge. The only reason they stay quiet is because people usually do not like being around a smart person. It is threatening to the ego. Story 60. Well, as a certified intelligent person, I stay quiet and listen as much as possible. The only exception is when someone else is being boastful. Then I dismantle them piece by piece. Story 61. I am going against the grain here, but I believe this. Prove me wrong so I can learn otherwise. Stay out of my way. Story 62. Someone who listens and asks questions to learn more. A smart person recognizes when they do not have all the answers. They also do not broadcast their intelligence quotient or put other people down. Story 63. They let everyone speak. They do not interrupt. They remain calm. They do not feel the need to share everything they know. Story 64. You cannot recall if you have ever actually heard them speak. They communicate mostly through simple gestures. Story 65. If they are truly that smart, do they not realize they are demonstrating it in a way that you are not perceiving? Story 66. I believe that someone who has a great capacity to hold knowledge is an intellectual. Someone with high intelligence understands specifics or subjects to a greater degree than most. Simply put, one's horizontal capacity to learn is their intellect, while their vertical ceiling is their intelligence. You can have one without the other to an extent. If someone were of average intelligence but highly intellectual, would you consider them smart? Story 67. I think there's no such thing as smart or stupid, only aware and unaware. Those who are aware tend not to say much. They may assume others are aware too, so there is nothing to say. Unaware people tend to talk a lot, merely appearing to be aware. Aware people listen. They may notice mistakes in others' thoughts and opinions, but may not be certain of the subject, or may not want to engage in corrections and get drawn into a contest of superiority. This is simply a social trait of some personalities. You just observe their traits as you listen quietly. What can you do? Tell them what their personality really is instead of going along with their false persona? It's best not to offend them or burst their bubble of self-confidence and self-delusion. Continual unawareness leads to endless incompetence. There is a saying I have heard. For those who say, don't know, and for those who know, don't say. Story 68. I have seen these types of posts quite often lately on both sides of the spectrum. Assign someone is smart, assign someone is dumb. I feel like, often as a society, we try to put people in boxes and judge them based on our preconceived notions of those behaviors. I understand that it is a mental shortcut to help us more quickly assess a person. I am guilty of it as well, yet even after acknowledging this, it feels disconcerting to me. When I had a poor understanding of my attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I would judge others like me harshly. Why are they interrupting? Why are they not listening? Why? I would assign a story to them that, in reality, only existed in my mind. They are disrespectful, they are inattentive or stupid. I have struggled with anxiety, so reading these types of things makes me feel self-conscious. Well then don't read it, people are missing the point. I start to worry about how I may be perceived, as even with medication, I don't really have a handle on things yet. Should I have to go around and tell people I am neurodivergent to avoid being judged as childish, inconsiderate, or narcissistic? I used to worry about this because I had really low self-esteem and feared missing out. I have at least tackled most of the self-esteem issues, but even in writing this, I have to acknowledge that I hold an image of myself as being an intelligent person. These types of posts bruise because I don't fit in these boxes, which really shouldn't matter, but I would be lying if I said that I truly feel that belief rather than just know it. I think I still have some work to do in reducing my need for external validation, and in a way, this post itself is an expression of that need for these feelings or my intelligence to be validated. Some days I really wish I could just shut the flood of unsolicited thoughts inside my mind off, as this comment has been brought to you by my inability to find a suitable stimulus to help me distract my mind into sleep. Good night all. Story 69. Anyone who has seen Person of Interest knows how smart Harold Finch is and also how good he is at pretending not to be. He is soft-spoken, avoids attention, and lets others take the spotlight. But he built the machine. That says it all. Story 70. Changing the subject quickly when the conversation turns to something they are clearly knowledgeable about. Story 71. They admit when they make a mistake and take accountability. If one can learn from the mistake, all the better. Story 72. It is a combination of humility, self-assurance, and the ability to remain grounded while understanding and navigating complex ideas. Story 73. Listening, not interrupting. An intelligent person does not need to dominate a conversation. They know how to listen carefully, ask relevant questions, and do not interrupt because understanding is important to them, not showing off. Story 74. I do not know if this counts, but I have never had to study. I can pick up the most complex things without trying. I have a natural gift beyond anything that my old science teacher ever experienced. I do not know why, but I do not struggle with anything science-based at all, to the point that I talk to professors and suggest different ways of testing genetics. I plan to seek higher education in college science and genetics courses because I am curious to learn what I do not yet know. Story 75. The ability to admit mistakes. Failure is not a disaster for them but a source of experience. A person is not afraid to admit that he or she has made a mistake, and this says much more about intelligence than impeccable ostentatious behavior. Story 76. They get frustrated when others call them intelligent all the time because they do not see themselves that way. I had a very intelligent colleague who told me this. I still do not know why it bothered him. Story 77. They listen more than they speak. They ask thoughtful questions, observe quietly, and often give simple but insightful advice that makes you think, why didn't I see it that way before? Story 78. The speed at which they learn new skills and the amount of detail they can recall without referencing additional resources. Story 79. A smart person can effectively explain a complex concept to someone in plain language without condescension or jargon. Story 80. I like to start every conversation by saying that I am very intelligent and probably smarter than you. What would you like to know? Story 81. They listen more than they talk, and when they do speak, it is simple but makes you rethink everything. Story 82. The smartest people I have ever met or recognized as being on the genius spectrum are those who are exceptionally creative. I don't mean someone who likes to paint or write a song. I'm talking about someone who can only express themselves by creating a whole new way to paint or a whole new way to experience music. But here's the kicker. They don't seem to realize what they created. Or they do, but just don't care about it. I remember a few years ago the Beastie Boys documentary came out. They are my generation, but I didn't know much about them until that documentary. Adam Yauch was truly a genius-level person. You can see it in his actions and the way he effortlessly pursued things. His two bandmates knew what they had and held on tight for the ride. Albert Einstein, too, was an effortless creator. He created an entire universe simulation in his brain and performed his experiments in that simulation. Look at people who just do without much effort and without drawing any attention to themselves. Those are the smartest people in the room. Story 83. People who speak with nuance. Anyone who gives answers claiming to be universal and always true is more often wrong. People who say, "it depends," or "there are a multitude of answers," are really smart and have in-depth knowledge. Story 84. Sitting around in a circle with people, chatting about recent events, one person starts expressing an opinion about something that is entirely wrong. You know the person across from you also knows they are wrong but says nothing and just lets them continue. Story 85. My 2-year-old daughter is doing a jigsaw puzzle upside down. She is just sitting on the floor in the middle of the bomb site her room always is. She is doing it for herself, not to show off. Story 86. They learn faster and have a better understanding. They are not satisfied with just grasping the basics. They always seek more knowledge and tend to be obsessive about perfection and fully understanding concepts. For example, in university, I befriended a couple of the smartest students in my engineering cohort. I was always slower at learning math concepts, but these students would sit in class without taking notes because they understood the teacher's explanations before he finished his examples. They would then ask very specific questions that usually led to deeper concepts. When we worked on homework, they probably spent 1/4 of the time I did because their understanding and problem-solving skills were significantly better. Story 87. When individuals are above average in many skills rather than excelling in just one hobby or profession, intelligence reflects adaptability. Story 88. They don't think they are actually smart because that implies they are making a comparison to something or someone. Intelligence quotient is a number used to place someone on a spectrum, with 100 being the average and anything above or below that serving as the comparison. At least that is how I see it. Smart compared to what? Story 89. They drive a Honda or Toyota either when it is difficult for them to afford it or when they could easily afford something more expensive. Story 90. Not an exact answer, but I have always thought being intelligent is not about what you know, but how well you can learn things you do not know. Story 91. They ask thoughtful questions because they are genuinely paying attention, not trying to sound smart. When they explain things, it just clicks. You finally get it. Story 92. They ask relevant and thoughtful questions. They listen to analyze, not to react or respond quickly. They admit if they do not have enough knowledge of the topic. Story 93. Well, in my case, I consider myself to be quite intelligent, not a genius, but I have a brain. The point is, when you consider yourself intelligent, someone is always going to come and ask very specific questions, to which you may not have an answer or simply have not stopped to think about before. At least, that is what I believe will happen. Story 94. Their actions will tell you that a person who does things efficiently is smart. Story 95. Hard to say. Someone really smart trying not to show it would keep quiet most of the time and guide people in the right direction without them even noticing. As it is said, an excellent job is when people compliment your work. A perfect job is when nobody knows you did anything at all. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.